The Thomas family's home, once a haven of warmth and laughter, now sat in oppressive silence. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty. It was filled with words unsaid, with the music that was no longer played, and with the absence of the eldest son, Jacob, whose presence had once been the heart of this family. Susan Thomas sat motionless in the dim living room, where dust particles danced in the slants of light, piercing the drawn curtains. She was tracing the patterns on the armrest of Jacob's favourite chair, each line a path back to memories she couldn't bear to release. In Jacob's room, Richard Thomas lingered in the doorway. His tall frame, usually so sure and grounded, seemed shrunken, diminished by the weight of his son's absence. The room was a capsule of Jacob's existence. Guitar picks scattered on the nightstand, a pile of dog-eared novels on the desk, and the walls plastered with posters of rock bands that had stopped playing in this house. The colours were too bright, too vibrant against the dull ache that filled Richard's chest. It was as if Jacob had just stepped out and would return any moment, headphones around his neck, a smile playing on his lips. Meanwhile, Lila Thomas, the middle child, had her own way of coping with the gaping hole Jacob's death had left. Her bedroom door was closed, but the muffled sound of her sobs was audible through the wood. Earlier that evening, she had erupted at Susan, her words sharp and accusing, blaming their collective blindness for not seeing the signs of Jacob's depression. Now alone, she allowed herself to feel the full extent of her grief, the anger a mere facade for the helplessness that consumed her. The youngest, Max, was nestled in a corner of the living room, his eyes fixated on the screen in front of him. The video game's sound effects filled the room with artificial conflict and triumph, a stark contrast to the real battle they had all lost. His fingers moved mechanically over the controller, but his mind was far away, lost in the days when Jacob would join him in these virtual worlds, their laughter a melody that now hung in the echoes of the past. It was during one of these long evenings, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the living room, that Susan found the poem. Tucked between the pages of Jacob's leather-bound journal, the words were like a whisper from beyond, a final message from their son, whose voice they would never hear again. The poem spoke of darkness, of a weight that had become too heavy to carry, and of a longing for peace that Susan's heart ached to understand. In the days that followed, Richard discovered a string of unanswered emails from Jacob's school counsellor, flagging his son's declining grades and withdrawn behaviour. The electronic missives lay bare on the screen, each one a missed opportunity, a call for help that had gone unnoticed in the whirlwind of daily life. Richard's hands shook as he read them, a silent fury building within him, not just at himself, but at a world that had failed to keep his son safe. The first chapter of their story closed with the family gathered at the dinner table, an empty seat glaring at them with the reality of their loss. Susan attempted to maintain some semblance of normalcy, serving lasagna, Jacob's favourite, but the sight of his untouched plate, the stillness where his laughter should have been, was too much. The meal ended with the lasagna cold and congealed, the family retreating to their separate corners of grief, each struggling with the burden of what-ifs and if-onlys. Under the dusky sky, the Thomas family joined the community vigil. Hands trembling, each held a candle, the flames flickering like the fragile pulse of their collective heartache. Susan's gaze was fixed on the small light, a beacon in the night for Jacob. The vigil's soft murmur of voices was a stark contrast to the tumultuous storm of emotions within her. She had prepared words, a eulogy of sorts, but when her turn came to speak, her voice faltered, and the words she'd clung to evaporated into the chill night air. Richard's eyes scanned the crowd and landed on Jacob's former teacher, Mr. Anders. Their shared look was an unspoken conversation of regret. The teacher's eyes, rimmed with red, spoke volumes of the impact Jacob had had on those around him. Richard felt a knot in his throat, the reality of his son's far-reaching influence dawning on him in the most heart-wrenching way. The return home was silent, each member of the Thomas family lost in their thoughts. Susan retreated to the garden, where Jacob's rosebush was just beginning to bud, a cruel reminder of the life that should have been. She touched the petals gently, whispering words she wished she could say to her son. The solitude of the garden was a stark contrast to the camaraderie of the vigil, but here she found a private space to mourn. Richard, meanwhile, found himself unable to discard the mental health pamphlets they'd received at the vigil. His earlier impulse to throw them away had waned. Instead, he left them on the kitchen counter, a small concession to the reality they faced. The act felt like a betrayal of his denial, an admission that they needed help, and that Jacob had needed help they hadn't given. Lila's resistance to grief counselling was fierce. She poured her confusion and sorrow into the pages of her journal, her writing a torrent of emotions that she couldn't voice. The journal was her refuge, the one place where she could be honest about the anger and guilt that consumed her. She couldn't face the group sessions. The thought of sharing Jacob's story with strangers filled her with a fierce protectiveness. But it was during a support group session that the fragile walls they had built began to crumble. Another parent's account of their child's hidden depression struck a chord with Susan. The parallels were too close, the outcome too similar. She bolted from her chair, escaping into the cold, needing space to breathe, to escape the piercing truth that they weren't alone in their ignorance. Richard had accompanied her to the session, but he couldn't find the strength to follow her out. Instead, he sat there, fists clenched, as another father recounted the small signs he'd missed, the changes he'd attributed to teenage moodiness rather than a cry for help. Richard recognized himself in that father's story, and the recognition was a punch to the gut. He left the session with a resolve to start facing the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The night ended with the Thomas family once again at home, together but separate in their grief. The support group session had pulled at the threads of their denial, leaving them exposed and raw. It was clear that the journey ahead would be long and fraught with painful realizations, but the first steps toward healing had been taken unwillingly, unwittingly, as they faced the inescapable truth of their new reality. In the wake of their reluctant acceptance, the Thomas family found themselves at another support group meeting. This time, they were no longer spectators to others' grief, but participants in a shared journey. There, they met the Harrisons, a couple who had walked a path eerily similar to their own. The Harrisons spoke of their daughter with a familiar blend of love and sorrow, their words etching a bond of understanding with the Thomases. At home, Richard dusted off Jacob's old camera, a high-end DSLR, a relic of a shared hobby long abandoned in the busyness of life. He ventured into the backyard where he and Jacob had once chased the golden hour, capturing the simple beauty of their garden. Now, through the lens, Richard sought not just memories, but a connection with Jacob, each photo a tribute and a step towards reconciling with his loss. Meanwhile, Lila poured her restless energy into organizing a suicide awareness event at her high school. She coordinated with counselors, invited speakers, and set up booths. The day of the event, as she watched her peers engage with the material, something inside her shifted. She felt a twinge of pride, not just in her own efforts, but in Jacob's lasting influence. It was as if, through this event, he was still touching lives, still a part of this world. However, their newfound purpose was not without its challenges. At a school board meeting intended to discuss the integration of mental health programs into the curriculum, the Thomases encountered resistance. The board members were wary of the cost and the potential for controversy. Susan's plea, passionate and raw, cut through the murmur of the meeting room. She spoke not just as a bereaved mother, but as an educator who had seen the signs of struggle in many faces over the years. The pushback at the meeting left Susan shaken, but it also lit a fire within her. She had always been the one to smooth over conflict, to keep the peace. But now, she stood at the forefront of a battle she had never anticipated fighting. The hard truth that their struggle was part of a larger societal issue was both a burden and a clarion call to action. It was the discovery of Jacob's journal that became the tipping point. Hidden in the bottom drawer of his desk, beneath old school notebooks and forgotten sketches, the journal was a chronicle of his inner turmoil. The pages were filled with his neat handwriting, recounting the days when darkness seemed to overshadow everything else. For the Thomases, reading it was like hearing Jacob's voice again. Only this time it spoke of things they had never known, of feelings he had never voiced. The journal ended abruptly, the last entry a haunting prelude to his final act. It was a raw, unfiltered view into Jacob's soul, and it left the family reeling. The hard truth of his pain was now undeniable, and with it came a new resolve. They could no longer ignore the silent epidemic that had claimed their son. The ultimatum was clear: either retreat into their shell of grief, or step out and use their voice to incite change. That night, as the family sat together in the living room, the journal open on the coffee table, the air felt charged with a new determination. They were no longer just survivors of tragedy. They were advocates, armed with the truth and a desperate need to turn their loss into a legacy of hope. The Thomas family, newly christened as advocates, faced their first major hurdle. The school board meeting had exposed the deep-rooted resistance within the community. Susan Thomas, who once stood before classrooms with ease, found herself grappling with the skepticism of the board. Her voice, however, did not waver as she recounted the subtle changes in Jacob Thomas's behaviour, missed opportunities that could have saved him. Richard Thomas's approach was more methodical. He spent evenings compiling data, crafting a presentation that detailed the benefits of mental health programs. His once clear office now resembled a strategist's war room. Papers and books stacked in towers, each statistic a soldier in their campaign for change. Lila Thomas, in her own realm at school, encountered whispers and sideways glances. Her peers, once distant, began to approach her with their stories, their confessions echoing Jacob's silent pleas. The awareness event had stirred something within the student body, a collective awakening to the struggles they all faced but seldom shared. The first cracks in the school board's armour appeared when a young student, bolstered by Lila's efforts, shared his own battle with depression. The room fell silent as his story unfolded, a narrative so similar to Jacob's that it could not be ignored. The board, faced with the human cost of inaction, began to waver. Susan's persistence paid off when the board agreed to a pilot program. It was a small victory in the grand scheme, but a monumental one for the Thomas family. Yet the triumph was overshadowed by the tangible presence of Jacob's absence. Every step forward was a reminder of why they had to take it. Amidst the small victories and burgeoning hope, the journal remained a touchstone of reality. Its pages, now worn from frequent readings, held the truths they had to face. Jacob's words were a window into a world they had never known, a world filled with shadows that Susan, Richard and Lila were only beginning to understand. The hard truth was not just in the words Jacob had written, but also in the spaces between them, the entries he hadn't made, the thoughts he couldn't bear to record. The journal was a map of a journey they had not taken with him, but it galvanized them to ensure that others would not have to walk that path alone. As the chapter of their lives closed with the school board's tentative approval, the Thomas family stood at the edge of a new frontier. They had faced the forces of indifference and emerged not unscathed but undefeated. The ultimatum had been met with a resolute answer. They would not retreat. They would fight with the truth as their weapon and Jacob's memory as their shield. The night fell on the Thomas household, a home still riddled with grief, but now also filled with purpose. The living room, once a tableau of despair, had become a command centre for change. The silence that had once been oppressive was now punctuated with plans and strategies, a family united under a banner of hope and a mission born of the deepest loss. With newfound resolve, the Thomas family turned their home into the headquarters for the Jacob Thomas Foundation. Susan Thomas, who had transformed her sorrow into purpose, led meetings around the dining table, her agenda clear and her vision contagious. Richard Thomas, once a reluctant participant, now reached out to his corporate contacts, pitching the Foundation's mission with a conviction that could only come from a place of personal loss. Lila Thomas, armed with the raw authenticity of a sibling touched by suicide, took to social media to amplify their cause. Her posts, candid and heartfelt, resonated with her peers, garnering an outpouring of support and stories that mirrored her own. As the Foundation's plans solidified, the first major event loomed on the horizon, a community fundraiser meant to establish their presence and raise the much-needed capital to begin their outreach. The family spent countless nights preparing, their living room awash with brochures, posters, and donation envelopes. Max Thomas, the youngest, meticulously folded pamphlets, his way of contributing to the brother he missed dearly. The fundraiser was a microcosm of the community's varied responses to mental health discussions. There were those who embraced the cause, their donations and words of encouragement fueling the Thomas family's hopes. But there were skeptics too, their whispered doubts a harsh reminder of the stigma they were up against. Despite the mixed reception, a sense of accomplishment filled the family as the event drew to a close. They had stepped into the public eye, standing firm against the tides of judgment and apathy. It was a triumph, albeit a small one, but as they counted the modest funds raised, they knew it was only the beginning. However, the harsh light of reality dawned when their main sponsor withdrew support, citing concerns about the Foundation's ability to effect real change. The news was a gut punch, the carefully stacked pillars of their fledgling organization seeming to tremble under the weight of this setback. In the aftermath, a revelation awaited Lila Thomas. Sifting through Jacob's belongings for items to auction at the fundraiser, she discovered a cache of letters he had written but never sent. They were addressed to a cousin in another state, someone the family rarely saw, and they spoke of Jacob's intention to seek help, to try and find a way out of the darkness that had enveloped him. The letters were a balm and a blade, soothing in their indication that Jacob had sought escape from his pain, but cutting in their reminder of the help that arrived too late. They revealed a side of Jacob that the family had never known, one that was reaching out for help in his own way. The chapter closed on the Thomas family, huddled together in the aftermath of the fundraiser. The letters spread out before them. They were a tangible connection to Jacob, a silent testament to his struggle, and now a clarion call that hardened their resolve. The Foundation had suffered a blow, but they were not deterred. They were the bearers of Jacob's legacy, and they would carry it forward, no matter the challenge. The loss of their main sponsor was a harsh reminder of the realities of advocacy work for the Thomas family. Yet they refused to let it define the future of the Jacob Thomas Foundation. With every obstacle, their determination grew, their mission becoming clearer and more urgent. Susan Thomas, once a quiet presence, now found a voice that rang out in town halls and school auditoriums, her story a rallying cry that could not be ignored. Richard Thomas took to the task with a strategic mind, poring over ledgers and spreadsheets, his expertise in finance becoming the backbone of the Foundation's sustainability. He worked tirelessly, often late into the night, his home office a beacon of light in the quiet neighbourhood, a symbol of the family's unyielding commitment. Lila Thomas, her brother's story etched into her heart, spoke to anyone who would listen. Her school had become the first to adopt the Foundation's proposed mental health curriculum, and now she sought to expand their reach. Her once shaky presentations were now delivered with passion and poise, capturing the attention of students and educators alike. The direct conflict with skepticism and apathy came to a head at a city council meeting. The Thomases, with a cohort of supporters, proposed a citywide mental health initiative. They faced tough questions and stiffer opposition, but they stood their ground, armed with facts, figures, and real-life stories that underscored the critical need for their work. Amid these challenges, an unexpected failure struck. The venue for their biggest planned event, a charity concert, fell through, leaving them scrambling for alternatives. The disappointment was palpable, the setback a significant blow to their momentum. It felt, in that moment, as if the world was against them, as if their efforts were being systematically dismantled. Yet, it was during this low point that a shocking revelation came to light. In a box of Jacob's belongings, intended for the charity auction, they found his old smartphone. Charged and powered on for the first time since his death, the phone revealed a gallery of photos and videos. There was Jacob, alive and smiling, speaking about his hope for the future, his desire to overcome his struggles. It was a side of him they'd only glimpsed in his journal, now given voice and image. The discovery of the phone was a poignant reminder of what was at stake. It brought into focus the many faces of those battling with mental health issues, the many smiles that hid pain. It was a visceral connection to their cause, one that reignited their resolve when doubt had begun to creep in. As they gathered in the living room, the day's disappointments hanging heavy in the air, the Thomas family watched Jacob's videos together. It was a moment of unity, of shared purpose that galvanized them. They would not be deterred by a lost venue or by fickle sponsors. They would move forward, for Jacob and for the countless others like him. The chapter ended not with defeat, but with a quiet determination. The Thomases, once fractured by their loss, now found strength in their unity, in the shared vision of a world that would not turn away from the silent struggles of its youth. Following the disappointment of the cancelled charity concert, the Thomas family was enveloped in a palpable gloom, as if the very walls of their home bore the weight of their collective despair. Susan Thomas, who had been the unyielding force behind the Jacob Thomas Foundation, now found herself questioning the point of it all. Her voice, which had so recently been filled with conviction, faltered as she read and reread the cancellation email. Richard Thomas responded to the setback with a silent stoicism that was unnerving. The meticulous stacks of paperwork in his office lay untouched, the numbers and plans they contained a stark reminder of the fragility of their mission. His usual late-night vigils were replaced by long, silent hours in the dark, the glow of his computer screen a ghostly presence in the empty room. Lila Thomas watched her family's spirits wane, her own heart heavy with the same doubts. The vibrant energy that had propelled her activism seemed to drain away, leaving her feeling powerless. She closed her laptop on the draft of a speech she was meant to give, her words feeling hollow and inadequate. It was the youngest, Max Thomas, who broke through the malaise. In a rare moment of quiet togetherness in the living room, he reminded them of the small victories they had achieved and the importance of their work. His words, simple yet profound, served as a reminder of the love that still bound them together, a love that Jacob had left behind. Emboldened by Max's unexpected wisdom, Susan Thomas rallied. She revisited the Foundation's mission statement, refining it, allowing the setback to clarify and strengthen their resolve. She organized a small, impromptu gathering in their backyard, inviting neighbors, friends, and local supporters to share in their vision and to keep the conversation about mental health alive. Richard Thomas, inspired by his son's resilience, reached out to alternative venues for the concert, his tone one of quiet determination. He found solace in action, in the practical steps that could lead them out of the shadow of their recent failure. Lila Thomas, her spirits reignited by her brother's words, finished her speech. She recorded it and posted it online, her voice unwavering as she spoke of the urgent need for mental health awareness, for remembering Jacob, and for the work yet to be done. The chapter drew to a close with the family gathered in the soft glow of twilight, surrounded by the warmth of their community. They shared stories, laughter, and tears, the evening air filled with a chorus of voices that spoke of hope and resilience. The foundation, like the family at its core, had weathered a storm, but they stood together, their resolve unbroken, their journey far from over. As night descended, the candles they lit flickered against the darkness, each flame a testament to their unwavering commitment to change the narrative around mental health, to forge a path in Jacob's memory that would light the way for others. The Thomas family faced their ultimate test when a critical piece in the local newspaper questioned the viability and impact of the Jacob Thomas Foundation. The article was a stark portrayal of doubt and skepticism, casting a shadow over their efforts and challenging the very core of their mission. Susan Thomas, once the bedrock of optimism, felt the sting of public scrutiny as she read the columnist's piercing words that morning, her hands shaking slightly as they held the paper. Richard Thomas, who had always found solace in the refuge of numbers and strategy, was at a loss. The article had thrown a wrench into their plans, and the phone calls he had been so diligently making to drum up support were now met with hesitation and the echo of the columnist's doubts. The Foundation's future, once so bright, now hung in the balance, hinging on the court of public opinion. Lila Thomas, who had become a beacon of youth advocacy, sat stunned in her room, the glow of her computer screen illuminating the crestfallen look on her face. The social media platforms, once allies in her quest, were now battlegrounds of opinion and debate, some echoing the article's sentiments, others rallying to their defence. But just as the weight of potential defeat seemed too much to bear, an unexpected victory came their way. Amidst the fervour, an email notification pinged softly on Susan's laptop. An anonymous donor, moved by the raw honesty of Lila's online speech, had come forward with a significant contribution, breathing new life into the Foundation's dwindling resources. The donor, a local business owner who had silently struggled with depression, saw the Foundation's mission as a beacon of hope. With this newfound support, the Thomas family convened in their living room, a space that had seen the spectrum of their grief and resolve. They mapped out a plan to address the criticism head-on, to use the donation as a springboard for a renewed push for awareness and change. This was their moment to pivot from defence to offence, to transform the narrative from one of doubt to one of undeniable impact. The chapter reached its peak as the family, bolstered by the community's support, hosted an open house at the Foundation. The event was a vibrant tapestry of voices, stories and commitments, a stark contrast to the uncertainty that had clouded their mission just days before. The rooms buzzed with conversations, plans for future events, and networks of support that extended beyond the walls of the Foundation. As the event drew to a close, the Thomas family stood together, a unit transformed by the trials they had faced. They had stared down the spectre of defeat and emerged victorious, their vision for the Foundation clearer and more vital than ever. The support they received was not just financial. It was a mandate from the community to continue their work, to keep fighting, to ensure that Jacob's legacy would be one of hope and change. The evening wound down with quiet conversations and the soft clinking of glasses, the air filled with a sense of accomplishment and anticipation. The family had not just survived their darkest hour. They had turned it into a defining moment for the Jacob Thomas Foundation, a turning point that would guide their path forward. As the Thomas family gathered in the newly renovated community centre that once was Jacob's bedroom, they stood surrounded by local volunteers, each ready to contribute to the Jacob Thomas Foundation's mission. The walls, freshly painted in soothing tones, were adorned with artwork and inspirational quotes about strength and perseverance. It was a far cry from the sombre space it had once been, now alive with the buzz of planning and collaboration. Susan Thomas, who had spearheaded this transformation, looked around with a sense of pride and bittersweet joy. The room had been Jacob's sanctuary, and now it was a sanctuary for many. She felt his absence acutely, yet she knew that this was a fitting tribute to his life, a space where healing could begin and where his struggle would encourage others to seek help. Richard Thomas, whose practical nature had kept the Foundation's finances afloat, now found himself mentoring a group of volunteers on fundraising strategies. His meticulous attention to detail and newfound openness to sharing personal experiences lent a sense of authenticity to the work they were undertaking. Lila Thomas, ever the activist, organised workshops and support groups, guiding her peers with a wisdom that had been hard-earned. She had become a pillar of the community, her voice a beacon for those who had once felt as lost as she had in the wake of Jacob's death. In this final chapter of their journey, Max Thomas emerged as a young leader, his empathy and experience resonating with other children affected by the loss of siblings or friends. He facilitated a youth group, creating a safe space for sharing and understanding that was a testament to the legacy his brother had left behind. The rebirth of the Thomas family was not just in their actions, but in their very beings. Each had been transformed by the crucible of loss and the relentless pursuit of their mission. They had faced the darkest of days, the chilling spectre of defeat, and had emerged not unscarred but undeniably stronger. As they hosted the first official event in the community centre, the family reflected on the journey they had undertaken. The pain of the past was still a part of them, but it no longer defined them. They had found a way to weave their grief into a tapestry of hope and action, creating a new narrative from the threads of their tragedy. The event concluded with the lighting of candles, a silent homage to Jacob and all those who had struggled in silence. The soft glow cast by the flickering flames illuminated the faces of those gathered, each one a story of resilience, a shared human experience that transcended individual suffering. The Thomas family had come full circle, their home now a beacon in the community, a place where the conversation about mental health was loud and clear, where stigma was replaced with support, and where Jacob's memory lived on, inspiring change and fostering hope. The chapter and the story ended with a sense of completion, not of an end, but of a beginning. The foundation was Jacob's legacy, a path forward carved from the depths of despair, a testament to a family's love, and a reminder that even in the darkest of times there is light to be found.